After a reserved black girl experiences severe bullying at her new school, no one intervenes until her father, a man with a concealed past he's long tried to keep hidden, resolves to speak out. Imani Reddick stood near the side entrance of Halston Middle School, clutching her backpack strap until her fingers hurt. She didn't cry. That wasn't her way. She remained silent, her chin slightly lowered, observing the stream of students who didn't even acknowledge her. She had discovered that remaining unnoticed could offer more protection than being visible. Mobile, Alabama, was not her home. Her home was Savannah, or at least it had been, that old brick apartment with the broken mailbox and the familiar smell of fried fish every Sunday. But her father insisted they needed a fresh beginning. Consequently, they were now living in a duplex with two white walls and neighbors who offered no greetings. Her initial week at Halston High had been largely uneventful. The teachers were courteous, her coursework was within her abilities, and the cafeteria food was acceptable. Children possessed a remarkable ability to detect subtle shifts, much like dogs identifying fear. Imani rarely spoke unless necessary. Her father often remarked that her voice carried weight, and she avoided using it for casual conversation. Her hair was styled in precise twists. Her shoes were polished, and her clothes were neatly pressed. She presented a simple, intelligent appearance, avoiding anything ostentatious, simply careful. She actively avoided drawing attention to herself. However, on Thursday, attention sought her out regardless. She walked along the B Hall corridor, on her way to science class, when a tall boy with sunburned cheeks and a smug look blocked her path. "Hey," he said, tilting his head like a puppy feigning friendliness. "You don't talk much, do you?" Imani blinked at him, uncertain if it was a question or a challenge. "What's wrong?" he pressed. "Are you too good to say hi?" She replied softly, attempting to move past. He shifted aside and bumped her shoulder, causing her to stumble slightly. "Chill out." She simply acknowledged him. He didn't respond, continuing his walk, his heartbeat quickening unexpectedly. His name was Tyler McHale. She discovered this later during gym class, when he erupted in laughter during a basketball game and called another student slow as hell, a comment audible to everyone in the room. The other boys joined in his laughter. Even the coach remained largely silent. Tyler McHale was known for a certain behavior, though it was rarely spoken of directly. He belonged to that category of children best left undisturbed, especially if you valued tranquility. Imani recognized the pattern. He possessed the hallmarks: boisterous, presumptuous, and exhibiting a subtle cruelty that often escaped adult observation. That evening, at their residence, her father posed the customary inquiry. "How was school, dear?" She responded with a slight lift of her shoulders. "Okay. Anyone causing you difficulties?" She denied it with a headshake. Darius Reddick scrutinized her expression. His gaze was penetrating. It didn't gloss over details. She held his gaze for a moment, then averted her eyes and began to play with her fork. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" he said. "I know." She didn't elaborate. He didn't press. He always respected boundaries. That's what he's taught her since she was little. A reserved child isn't fragile. They're simply waiting for the appropriate moment to share. Imani hoped that principle still applied. But the atmosphere of Halston was altered. This wasn't Savannah. This wasn't the neighborhood where Miss Charlene looked after her when her dad worked late, or where Mr. Jalen across the street gave her peppermints on Sundays. This place didn't feel like it had people, just moving pieces. On Friday, Tyler walked past her in the lunch line and accidentally knocked her tray sideways. Chicken tenders and mashed potatoes hit the floor. "Oh, my bad," he said with a smirk. "Didn't see you there." Some kids laughed. Others looked away. The cafeteria monitor hardly looked up. Imani crouched to gather the tray, her cheeks flushed but her expression unreadable. She remained silent, simply tidying up and moving to the rear of the queue. Tyler departed as if everything was normal. However, it was significant, especially for her. But that was only the start, and the most difficult moments were still to come. By the second week, the cafeteria event felt like an introduction. Tyler had made it his purpose. Imani didn't understand why. Perhaps it stemmed from her lack of visible reaction compared to others. Or maybe because she didn't appear afraid, despite feeling it. Regardless, Tyler perceived this as a challenge. Initially, it manifested as hushed comments behind her in the hallway. This escalated to staged applause when she responded to questions in class. Following her excellent score on an English pop quiz, he publicly questioned, what's she attempting to demonstrate? Trying to be the teacher's favorite or something. During gym class one day, she was the last person chosen for teams. Tyler, positioned beside the student selecting players, whispered, she probably doesn't even sweat like the rest of us, but she thinks she's too good to stink. He spoke loud enough for 3 other boys to overhear. They laughed. Imani didn't respond. Her lack of reaction served as her shield. However, silence can sometimes exacerbate the situation. By Wednesday, the conflict escalated to physical actions. One morning, she entered class to discover someone had written "mute monkey" across her desk in pencil. She paused, studying the words briefly, before retrieving her eraser. Her hand moved deliberately as she erased. She detected muffled laughter nearby. Later that afternoon, in the hallway, Tyler passed by and murmured, "Better get used to it." That evening, she returned home with a torn strap on her backpack. Her father immediately observed the damage. "What happened?" Darius inquired. "It got caught in the locker hinge," she replied. He remained silent, not meeting her gaze, for a significant pause. Then, in a measured tone, he asked, "You sure about that?" She confirmed with a nod. "Yeah." Darius observed her for a few more seconds, his expression strained. He rose, proceeded to the kitchen, and opened a drawer. Returning with an antique sewing kit, he began to mend the strap while she sat at the table, feigning study. The quiet returned. It wasn't oppressive, just commonplace. She understood he was hesitant. She also recognized he would wait however long she required. A tightness began to build within her, feelings she couldn't articulate. Friday proved to be particularly difficult. During lunchtime, Tyler positioned himself directly across from her, without an invitation or a tray, simply offering a smile. "You don't enjoy conversation, do you?" he remarked, tapping the table with his fingers. "Are you one of those peculiar individuals? Do you believe yourself superior to others?" Imani continued eating, deliberately slow, bite after bite. "I asked you a question," he stated, raising his voice. "Or are you too unintelligent to respond?" Those nearby began to observe the exchange. Several phones were unavailable. Imani glanced up at last. "No," she stated. "No what?" she asked. "I don't believe I'm improved. I simply dislike waste." Immediately after the words were spoken, a plate of spaghetti launched from the periphery. It struck her chest, coating her shirt with red sauce and onto her lap. Amusement rang out. She rose deliberately, making no effort to clean the sauce, simply fixing her gaze on Tyler. His eyes widened, not with fear, merely with surprise. The lunch monitor arrived, predictably late. "What happened?" she asked, her expression already frustrated. Imani remained silent, instead choosing to gather her tray and proceed to the closest trash can. Sauce dripped, and her shirt was stained. Her heart pounded in her chest. That night, she skipped dinner. Her father knocked twice on her door before entering. She was seated on the floor, altering the shirt in her sketch pad, drawing thick black lines over what used to be white cotton. "Baby girl," he said quietly. She didn't answer. He came and sat beside her. "I've been keeping my peace," he said, "trying to let you breathe, give you time. But I know something's going on, and I ain't the type to just sit back while my daughter's hurting." She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "I can handle it." "I know you can," he said. However, that shouldn't necessarily be the case. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was how near things were to spiraling out of control. It happened the following Tuesday. The school day felt long and tiresome. Imani kept her head down, remained in the back of classrooms, and avoided the cafeteria entirely. She learned which bathrooms were usually empty, which hallways had working cameras, and which ones didn't. However, you can't account for everything. Following sixth period, she was walking along the east hallway. The walls were bare, the lockers were damaged, and there was little movement. Her backpack felt unusually heavy, not due to books, but from the burden she carried within. Feelings of anger, shame, and a nameless sensation that lingered behind her eyes, occasionally causing them to sting without explanation. Then she detected it, the sound of footsteps behind her. Rapid. She didn't look back, simply increasing her pace. However, a sudden shove followed. Forceful. Her shoulder impacted the metal lockers. Her bag slipped from her arm and landed on the floor. "What's your problem, freak?" Tyler's voice echoed behind her, too loud for the space. Imani turned slowly, breathing through her nose. "I'm not bothering you," she said. "Do you think you can disrespect me in front of everybody and get away with it?" He stepped closer. "Go away, Tyler. Or what? I'll tell someone." He grinned. "Like who? Those teachers that don't even look at you? Please." Imani didn't move, didn't blink. Tyler looked down, then abruptly reached for her backpack. She moved to obstruct him. A misjudgment. He pushed her again, this time using both hands. She stumbled. Her shoe snagged on the wall trim, and her head impacted the corner of the locker with a muted, unpleasant sound. She fell to the floor, as if her supports had been severed. A moment of stillness followed. Even Tyler recoiled slightly. Imani remained motionless. Blood began to trickle down the side of her face, a single streak across her cheek. A janitor located down the hall abruptly rounded the corner. His mop stopped in its motion. "Hey, what is happening?" he exclaimed, hurrying toward the scene. Tyler ran. The ambulance arrived in just minutes. The principal appeared suddenly, with a phone in hand, a worried tone of voice, and a visibly pale expression. The quiet moment they had previously afforded Tyler had vanished. By the time Darius received the notification, Imani was already at Springdale Medical Center. A nurse informed him that she was awake but required stitches. She sustained a mild concussion and had swelling on the left side of her face. He remained silent. He entered her room, his eyes carefully observing every detail, as if committing it to memory. She appeared smaller in the hospital bed. Not delicate, merely smaller than he recalled. She turned her head slowly upon seeing him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. That was what affected him deeply. "Don't," he said, kneeling beside the bed. "Don't apologize." Her lips trembled. "You instructed me to inform you when I required your presence. I am here now," he stated. He remained still. He sat with her for hours. He barely blinked. Nurses came and went. At one point, he asked one of them, gently, how many times the school had called about incidents with Imani. The nurse looked at her chart, then looked back at him. The answer was none. He stared straight ahead after that. When they finally got home, Imani went straight to bed. Darius didn't. He sat in the dark at the kitchen table, hands folded, eyes locked on a spot on the wall. He rose, proceeded to the rear closet, and retrieved an aged shoebox. The contents were innocuous. No weapons were present. No firearms. No blades. Only a folded sheet of paper, a photograph of a man he hadn't seen in 10 years, and a telephone number penned in diminishing blue ink. He examined it intently. Subsequently, he grasped the telephone and initiated a call. "Hello?" A voice responded. "It's me," Darius stated. A pause ensued. "Didn't expect to ever hear from you. I require information." "Regarding what?" "A boy. Caucasian. 13 years old. Tyler McHale." A mobile phone notification. A moment of silence. What is the meaning of this? He had admitted my daughter to the hospital. A lengthy pause followed. Then, one day prior, Darius terminated the call. He remained motionless, suspended in quiet. A part of him, long suppressed and deeply concealed, began to react. It wasn't anger, not even aggression, simply heightened awareness. However, making a call of that nature meant inviting consequence. And once a path was opened, unwelcome elements often entered, difficult to retract. 15 years ago, Darius Reddick was recognized under a different identity. In Savannah, the name Deke commanded attention. He wasn't boisterous, nor did he act impulsively, yet he consistently achieved his objectives. His methods were subtle, a quietness that instilled unease. Debts were settled, and disappearances were understood, thanks to him. He avoided direct violence, except in matters close to him, which were infrequent. Deke didn't seek a leadership role. he shunned the public eye. He positioned himself just behind those in power, and that's where true influence resided. But then Marissa became pregnant. Marissa wasn't living on the streets. She was pursuing her education to become a nurse. She was known for her beauty, directness, and intelligence. When she informed Darius they were expecting a child, a change occurred within him. He began to contemplate his lasting impact. He thought about what his daughter would perceive when she looked at him. He worried about the number of falsehoods it would require to conceal his true identity from her. Marissa did not survive the delivery. A tragic accident occurred. A rainy night, a drunk driver. She was gone, suddenly. Without warning, Darius was left with only a 5-pound baby girl who inherited her mother's eyes. Following this, he vanished, abandoning Savannah. He severed connections, sold the vehicles, concealed the cash, destroyed the phone, and relocated to smaller towns, securing unassuming jobs and maintaining a solitary existence. For 14 years, he erased himself from view, all for Imani. However, the phone call he initiated that night, after observing her at the hospital, marked the beginning of the unraveling. The individual he contacted, Terrence Bug Nichols, was not a friend. Not really. More like someone utilized when results were needed without interference. 3 days after the call, Bug sent a message. Tyler McHale, son of Curtis McHale, was with Mobile PD. Curtis ran a side job for a while, moving product through impounded vehicles. He was caught 5 years ago, but avoided conviction on a technicality. He still wears the badge. Still corrupt. Darius considered this information. He did not desire vengeance. This was not about harming a child. Understanding that his father was a man who abused his authority to manipulate people was a different matter. It suggested Tyler was acting aggressively because he's avoided repercussions. Someone had instilled in him the belief that there would be no accountability. This ignited a deep anger within Darius, an anger he hadn't felt in a considerable time. He drove across town that night. He parked a few blocks from an old warehouse by the train yard. He knocked once, then twice slow. Bug answered. His face appeared older. His body seemed thicker, but those eyes, still cold. Thought you were out for good. Bug said. I was. Bug gestured for him to come inside. So what changed? Darius looked around. Metal shelves, old crates, a faint hum of radio static in the corner. I need to scare somebody. Bug raised an eyebrow. Scare. I want the message to land, but no blood. Bug chuckled. That ain't your usual style. I'm not that man anymore. Bug looked at him for a long second, then nodded. All right, I got someone who owes me. Real discreet. Ex-military. Now works security. He will leave a note they will remember. No threats. No harm. Just presence, Darius stated. Bug grinned. You want to haunt the man. Precisely. 2 days later, Curtis McHale returned home to discover his front door slightly ajar. Inside, nothing was stolen. However, every drawer had been opened, and his framed awards were placed face down. A single Polaroid photo rested on his recliner, an image of Curtis from 5 years ago, hands cuffed, head down, flanked by officers. On the back, a simple sentence. If anything happens to my child again, yours is next. Curtis failed to report the incident. He understood the protocol. This was not something you concealed. During that same week, Tyler ceased attending school. There was no official notification. No farewell. Imani observed his absence, but remained silent. She returned to her classes, head held high, quiet, but no longer concealed. However, Darius recognized that revisiting the past doesn't always allow it to settle. Occasionally, it resurfaces with anger. The house phone rang shortly after 11:30 p.m. Darius seldom answered calls from numbers he didn't recognize, but a feeling compelled him to answer. He remained silent, simply waiting. A low, familiar, and dry voice spoke. You made noise, Deke. Darius paused before responding. Then he requested silence, just a presence. The voice emitted a chuckle. Yeah, well, some presence echoes louder than you think. Darius gripped the phone more firmly. Who is this? The voice inquired. You remember Devin Mars? That name caused a sharp, uncomfortable feeling in his throat. Devin Mars had previously worked as a problem solver in Savannah. Uncompromising. Precise. and driven by ambition. Darius had wronged him several years prior when Mars threatened someone Darius valued. The incident concluded with a tense confrontation that was never discussed. Until now, he currently resides in Pensacola, involved in real estate, nightclubs, and politics. His child attends Halston Prep. Rumors suggest he's become aware of your name once more, and he's displeased. Darius leaned back in his chair, the kitchen clock ticking behind him like a countdown. I'm no longer part of that world. Then why was your name being circulated again? Click. The line disconnected. For the next hour, Darius remained silent. His thoughts raced. Devin Mars did not forgive, and he did not forget. If his name was being passed around, that meant others were paying attention as well. It wasn't just about Tyler anymore. It was about what people believed Darius might become again. The mere thought of it made his stomach churn. He recalled Imani, how she used to fall asleep on his chest. She remembered how she'd learned to walk with her arms out like wings. He'd promised her a different life, a quiet one. But quiet wasn't always safe. At school, people noticed Imani was walking a little taller. She didn't smile much, but her silence now felt different. Less like retreat, more like strength. Her teacher, Miss Kendrick, pulled her aside after class. I just want to say I'm sorry we didn't do more. We should have, she said. Imani looked her in the eye. I am not relying on others to act appropriately anymore. Miss Kendrick stopped. You possess more strength than you realize. However, strength was insufficient on its own. On that Friday, a black SUV with tinted windows arrived outside the school precisely as the final bell sounded. The vehicle was not the property of a parent, and it remained parked. Imani observed it. A feeling, not of fear but of familiarity, churned in her stomach. She didn't know who was inside, but she had seen a car like that previously, back in Savannah. Following her grandmother's funeral, she informed her father that evening. Darius didn't inquire. He simply moved to the rear room and retrieved a phone from a drawer. Instead of contacting Bug, he dialed another number. A woman answered, her voice raspy, reminiscent of gravel and whiskey. It's been a long time, Deke. Too long, Tanya. I heard you went soft. I did on purpose, he replied. She chuckled once. That's good, but now you're calling. I need eyes on a vehicle. A black SUV with Florida license plates was parked outside Halston Middle School. A moment of silence followed. Then, a voice said, I'll have something for you tomorrow. That night, Darius remained near Imani's bedroom door. This wasn't due to a lack of faith in the locks. It was simply the spot where he felt most at ease. The following day, Tanya returned the call. The vehicles are connected to Mars nightclub. They are not registered in his name, but his driver utilizes them. Imani's school is not part of his typical route. Darius took a deep breath. He is currently not taking any action. He was either sending a message or anticipating one from you. That afternoon, Darius drove to Pensacola. There were no weapons and no threats. Only an old envelope containing a picture of Marissa, Imani's mother. He gave it to the security guard at Mars Club. He instructed the guard to tell Deke that this was now the only thing that mattered, and that if anything happened to her, he would not engage in conversation. The guard remained silent, accepting the envelope and retreating as if it were hazardous material. Darius did not wait for acknowledgement and returned home in silence. When individuals such as Mars are provoked, they do not allow the matter to drop. They identify vulnerabilities, and Darius possessed one. It began with a package. Small, plain, without a return address. It was sitting on Darius's porch 2 mornings after his trip to Pensacola. He understood he should not touch it immediately. He examined it, studied the corners. There were no wires. There was no unusual weight. Nevertheless, he opened it outdoors, cautiously, using a pocket knife he hadn't used in years. Inside was a USB drive. Nothing else. He brought inside. He connected it to the older laptop he's kept isolated from network. The screen displayed a solitary video file. It was labeled property. He initiated playback. Grainy security camera footage from a grocery store parking lot appeared. Imani was visible near the front entrance, using her phone. Then a figure entered the scene. He didn't approach her. He didn't speak. He simply stood across the lot facing her, watching. Subsequently, he walked away. The camera followed his movement. He was a white man, with a shaved head, wearing a blue jacket. A face Darius recognized. An old Mars enforcer. Still alive, it seemed. No warning had been given. None was necessary. The meaning was unmistakable. We could contact her whenever we pleased. Darius shut the laptop and remained motionless for a considerable time. Afterward, he entered the bathroom and studied his reflection. He no longer resembled Deke. The beard was flecked with gray. His hands appeared heavier than before. Yet something within him, something cold and sharp, remained untouched. He picked up the phone and initiated one last call. "It's important that they all be present," he stated. 3 hours later, he found himself in the back room of a car shop in Foley. 5 men were seated around him. Each possessed a history they hadn't documented. "Tell me why we're here," one of them inquired. "They threatened my daughter," Darius responded. There was no request for verification. His delivery wasn't challenged. "They intend to intimidate me into submission, but I've remained silent for 14 years. That's sufficient." "So what's the plan?" Darius asked, leaning forward. "We avoid direct confrontation. We pursue the underlying causes. Every man Mars is connected to is exposed. We illuminate them. Their records, their deals, their back channels. We leak everything." "You trying to destroy him?" Darius stated. "I'm reminding him that just because I walked away doesn't mean I forgot how to play." The men nodded. Over the next 3 days, Darius orchestrated a quiet demolition. Public records were sent to journalists. Photos were sent to wives. Hidden accounts were reported to the IRS. One of Mars' clubs suddenly got flagged for health code violations. Yet another establishment lost its liquor license abruptly. The process was handled discreetly and legally. However, the implications were unmistakable. By Friday, the SUV ceased appearing at Imani's school. Mars became silent. There was no retaliation, no communication, but the situation remained unresolved. That evening, Imani returned from school and discovered Darius at the kitchen table with the envelope from the club placed before him. She sat opposite him. For the first time, she inquired, "What did you used to do?" He regarded her for a prolonged period. Then he responded, "I engaged in actions I regret, actions that instilled fear in people, actions that ensured our sustenance." She acknowledged this slowly. "And now I'm striving to become someone different." She paused. "But you reverted to those actions to safeguard me." "I reverted to protect you from those who disregard the established guidelines. Not out of desire, because it was necessary." She remained silent for a moment. "I wish to no longer experience fear," she stated finally. He reached across the table. "You're not anymore." They remained seated for a while. As evening approached, no elaborate words were needed. It was a moment of shared understanding between two people. The following week at school, Imani offered to read her essay in English class. Her voice was steady. The essay explored courage, not the dramatic kind seen in films, but the courage to appear regardless, to speak even when hesitant, and to remain upright despite external pressure. Following the class, Ms. Kendrick offered a subtle smile, conveying a sense of pride. Imani returned the gesture, a quiet but genuine expression. Darius understood that peace achieved in this manner invariably demanded a price. He only hoped he had paid sufficiently. Spring arrived in Mobile Sutley that year. The trees bordering the schoolyard became vibrant and lush, and the days extended slightly. It had been nearly 2 months since Imani had last seen Tyler McHale's face. She never learned precisely what had transpired with him. Speculation circulated. He transferred schools. His dad took a leave. His family relocated. However, no one provided verification, and Imani had no desire to inquire. Her attention was now directed elsewhere. When Northwood High School announced the annual student-led assembly, Ms. Kendrick urged Imani to participate, to do more than simply attend, to speak. Initially, she felt unsure. However, something within her changed. A form of understated bravery emerged. It wasn't boisterous or flamboyant, but resolute, much like herself. Consequently, she registered. On the day of the event, as her name was announced, the gym grew almost silent. Teachers leaned forward. Students ceased their whispers. Imani walked to the podium with her hands at her sides. Her notes were folded in one pocket, untouched. She surveyed the crowd. Rows of students who had once laughed at her now ignored her or simply averted their gaze. And she began. My name is Imani Reddick. A few months ago, I wished no one would know my name. I didn't want to be noticed. I believed that staying quiet would keep me safe. She paused, but silence doesn't always guarantee safety. Occasionally, it merely renders you unseen by those who could offer assistance. It was painfully obvious to those who intended harm. Several people looked my way, and some averted their gaze. I experienced bullying. It wasn't due to any action on my part, simply because I didn't align with someone else's preconceived notion of how I should appear. It was a painful experience, and it diminished my sense of self. She briefly looked towards the back of the gym, where Darius stood partially obscured, with his arms crossed, observing her. However, I realized that silence does not equate to strength. Understanding when and to whom it's important to speak. That is strength. I believed I needed to manage everything independently. I was mistaken. She averted her gaze, then returned her attention upwards. I now have an advocate for me, not simply offering verbal support, but demonstrating tangible assistance. And I want every person present to acknowledge this, particularly those who have felt as I once did. You are not obligated to face challenges alone. The initial response was silence, a pause where the words resonated powerfully and truthfully. Then, a single clap broke the stillness. It was followed by others, until the room was filled with applause. Imani moved forward without a smile. It wasn't necessary. Her words carried the impact. Following the assembly, several students came to speak with her. They were subdued and showed deference. Many simply expressed their gratitude. Others offered their apologies. A few inquired about spending time together. She paused, considering her response. That evening, back at home, Darius prepared grilled chicken on the patio. The aroma of charcoal and sweet onions filled the air. Imani sat close by, her knees drawn to her chest, observing the dancing flames. Did you truly mean what you expressed? Darius questioned. He flipped the meat once. Then he glanced at her. Your mother. She used to speak like that. Imani smiled. You think she'd be pleased? I know she would. A silence followed. She'd also say I'm allowing you to mature too quickly, he added. Imani laughed once. You sort of are. He chuckled. I suppose we're both learning. Later, as the sun dipped behind the houses, they sat in quietness. Not the kind they used to carry around like armor. This quietness was different, lighter. Imani didn't require her father to be flawless. Her need was simply for his presence. And Darius, acknowledging all he had done and all he had concealed, understood that safeguarding her didn't invariably involve burying the past. Occasionally, it meant accepting responsibility for it, so she wouldn't have to. Existence rarely offers a complete escape from sources of pain. Yet it provides a choice. Remain silent, or voice your truth. Walk independently, or accept another support. Imani opted to speak, and Darius chose to listen. This is how they found healing. As a united front. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to see more. Each story we share explores authentic choices, real people, and the resilience needed to progress, regardless of your beginnings. It was assumed she would be vulnerable, simply another Black woman living alone. What they failed to realize was that she had support monitoring their every action. The moving truck arrived on a Tuesday, late morning. This was a time when most people were at work or running errands. However, in Roseville, California, early retirement and home offices meant that people observed everything. And someone was already observing from across the street before the lift gate even touched the driveway. Rochelle Carrington, age 42, stood beside her black SUV, a clipboard held in her hand, offering the movers hushed directions. She was tall, with a self-assured stance and a tranquil gaze, moving with the grace of someone who conserved her energy. Her attire consisted of jeans, boots, and a long-sleeved t-shirt, marked with a small breakfast stain, a detail she disregarded. This was not a display of style. It was the beginning of a new phase in her life. She had finalized the purchase of the two-story home just 1 month earlier. It featured a Spanish tile roof, beige stucco, and neatly trimmed hedges. This was a place that declared, "I built this." And she had, though not as her neighbors imagined. The first visitor was a tall man wearing khaki shorts and a golf cap. He identified himself as Douglas Varnell, the head of the HOA. His handshake was brief and impersonal, and he avoided eye contact. "Are you moving in by yourself?" he inquired, observing the security camera boxes near the front door. "No, Brachiri Plaivkin Saisli. Not everyone is here yet." "Well, if you need anything, we maintain order here," Douglas stated, briefly looking at the SUV before departing without acknowledging her. She observed him vanish behind his hedges. By sundown, Rochelle had unpacked sufficiently to consider the space habitable. Her home office was established, blinds were in place, and the kitchen was supplied. There were no signs, no music, and no boisterous visitors. Only her. Some plants adorned the porch, and a single folding chair was present. The following morning, a note was slid beneath her doormat. Reminder: all porch decor must adhere to HOA regulations. Flags, religious items, and political messages are prohibited. No name, no signature, just that. She chuckled. She didn't have a flag displayed, only a hand-painted ceramic sun her niece created in art class. It was hung askew beside the door. That afternoon, while adjusting her mailbox height, as the HOA had noted it was non-uniform, she observed a woman in yoga pants walking her dog slowly past her house. The dog paused, sniffing the grass, and the woman's gaze lingered a moment too long. "You new here?" the woman asked. "Looks like it," Rochelle responded, straightening. The woman offered a strained smile. "Well, the HOA is quite particular. It helps maintain the appearance of the neighborhood." "I'm familiar with the guidelines," Rochelle stated. The woman chuckled, but the sound lacked warmth. "That's good. We value a specific aesthetic for our neighborhood." The implication was unmistakable. Unbeknownst to them, beyond any prediction they could make, she had done more than simply read their book. She had studied classified briefing reports capable of disconcerting a senator. She had overcome language barriers, handled explosives, and participated in clandestine negotiations in countries she couldn't disclose. A neighborhood association would not deter her. Nonetheless, something felt amiss. She had relocated frequently, new towns, new cities, but the welcome felt staged. A forced pleasantness, conversations tinged with observation. Consequently, she installed the cameras, not out of suspicion, but out of readiness. One positioned above the door, another at the side entrance, and two angled in the front yard, addressing areas overlooked by most. That night, she stood on her porch with a glass of water, observing the street lights activate. A breeze rustled the leaves, and a lone car passed slowly, increasing its speed once it cleared her driveway. She felt no immediate danger, but also lacked a sense of ease. She dispatched a brief message from a disposable phone to a contact listed as Deb's Plumbing. Message content: settle incomplete. Activity already odd. Logging first flags. Standby. There was no response. She didn't require one. However, despite the stillness of that first week, Rachel sensed that the tranquility wouldn't persist for long. Within the second week, a subtle unease began to develop. The first sign was a formal notification affixed to her mailbox concerning parking regulations. The notice stated, "Driveway must be kept clear of oversized vehicles. Please use garage for storage." Her SUV was properly positioned, not obstructing pedestrian access, not encroaching on a neighbor's property, and it accommodated comfortably within the driveway. She removed the notice and placed it in the recycling bin. The following day, an unfamiliar man stood at the edge of her lawn, arms crossed, observing her as she watered the succulents in front of her bay window. "Hello," she called out. He remained silent, simply staring, before slowly walking away. That night, a second note appeared, printed entirely in capital letters. It read, "No unauthorized vehicles. Surveillance is active. HOA monitors street traffic." Surveillance. The irony caused her to laugh. She reviewed the surrounding area once more. Everything appeared normal, with the exception of a mounting feeling that someone, or multiple individuals disapproved of her presence. Several days passed, and then the police arrived. It was shortly after 6 p.m. golden sunlight illuminating the porch. A patrol car stopped and parked directly in front of her home. Two officers, courteous but formal, approached. "Ma'am, we received a call regarding a disturbance," one of them stated. "Reports of loud arguing." She blinked. "I reside alone. Are there any visitors this evening?" "No. You are welcome to verify." They did not enter, but they recorded a few observations and then departed. 15 minutes elapsed before she observed Douglas Varnell once more. Identical khaki shorts, same gait. He did not approach the door this time, merely stood close to his mailbox, engaged in conversation with a woman in yoga pants. Both glanced towards her. Rachel opened her front door and stepped outside, signaling that she was aware of their presence. Douglas nodded once. "Just checking to ensure everything is all right over there," he called out. "I'm all right," she responded. "Good, you know. The police visit when things don't conform to the regulations. Noise complaints, misuse of property. I pay the same fees as everyone else," she stated calmly. He raised his eyebrows, seeming to consider that a provocation, and then returned to his messaging. Later that week, the trash collection bypassed her house completely. While every other container on the street was serviced by Sunrise, hers remained uncollected. She contacted the sanitation department. There was no record of a missed pickup request, they stated. "This might seem unusual," she commented, "but is it possible someone reported my house as vacant?" The woman speaking on the phone hesitated briefly. "Indeed, yes. That's what appears in the notes." Rachel took a slow, deliberate breath. "I reside here. We will resolve this." She ended the call and returned to her porch, holding her phone, the camera light blinking gently above. That evening, her back fence gate was discovered slightly open. Not fully, but enough to indicate someone had attempted to open it. The lock still engaged when she tested it, but the chain showed a new abrasion, as if it had been pulled. This was sufficient for her. She accessed the encrypted tablet she kept in a locked drawer in her home office and started a low-level alert. Possible harassment escalation. Passive monitoring began. Authorization to activate detail? Moments later, a reply. Authorization approved. Detail shifting from secondary to active. Karina Bell had lived 2 doors down for years. She was a retired postal worker who enjoyed begonias and frequently discussed her knees, seemingly avoiding conversations about politics. However, the residents of Briar Hollow Court were unaware that Karina had previously worked in logistics within international security, a confidential role originating from Langley many years prior. She was indebted to Rachel, a significant debt. That favor had now been requested. The following morning, Karina arrived at Rachel's door, presenting a basket of muffins and a quiet smile. "She mentioned she thought you might appreciate some company," Rachel said. Rachel agreed and moved out of the way. "I'm assuming you're not simply visiting?" Karina asked, drawing closer. "I'm already diverting 2 drones away from your land. The Homeowners Association isn't your sole concern." Before Rachel could inquire about her meaning, a knock sounded at the door. And this time, it wasn't Karina with baked goods. It was 4:42 p.m. when they arrived, not in a squad car, not in a designated Homeowners Association vehicle. A silver sedan, notable for a cracked front headlight and excessively tinted windows, pulled up. 2 men exited the vehicle. They wore khaki pants and tucked-in polo shirts, each with laminated badges attached to their belts, badges that appeared cheaply made. One held a clipboard. The other feigned taking photographs of her yard with a phone. Rachel recognized this pattern. She had witnessed similar encounters previously, not in the suburbs, but in Havana, in Berlin, and in Port-au-Prince. The imposter, the bullying tactic, the unauthorized figure who falters when challenged. She unlocked her door before they even reached it. Karina remained inside, seated peacefully on the living room couch, enjoying tea as if it were a typical Wednesday. "You must be Miss Carrington, the one with the clipboard," she stated, her tone dripping with false sweetness and a sense of superiority. "We're with the Briar Hollow HOA Enforcement Committee. We have a few items to discuss with you." Rachel rested against the doorframe. Your badges are not scanning. You are not listed in the directory. And the HOA does not conduct in-person visits without a 72-hour notice. The man blinked, surprised she didn't react. Ma'am, he said, adjusting his tone, your porch has items that are not permitted, and we're receiving multiple complaints regarding frequent visitors. Is that against the rules? She asked, remaining still. The second man advanced. We require you to step outside. We want to review the violations with you. No, thank you. The first man's smile disappeared. We're simply attempting to assist you in preventing fines. This situation could worsen. I find that unlikely. They shared a glance. Then, the expression changed. Without speaking, they moved quickly. One attempted to grasp her arm. The other reached for the screen door. Karina reacted before they made contact. Back away, she stated firmly, moving with a skill unexpected of a retiree. Her phone was already in her hand, her thumb activating a sequence other than calling 911. Who the hell are you? One of the men demanded. Back up, Karina said. The man pulled the door open forcefully. Rachel remained still. She didn't cry out. She didn't retaliate. She turned a little and pressed her hand down firmly on his wrist, securing her grip with her thumb tucked in and her elbow bent. It was a precise maneuver learned from her training. The man swore, taking a step back. Enough, Rachel said softly. They weren't prepared for that. The second man recovered quickly. He moved forward again, but the sound of tires on gravel caused all three to stop. Two dark SUVs entered the street. There were no sirens, no lights, and no identifying markings, only a calm, consistent approach. The men glanced back, attempting to assess the situation. You can run, Rachel stated, but it will be more difficult. The men remained still. One appeared to be breathing heavily, while the other attempted to appear composed. Shortly after, both SUVs stopped. Four people emerged, two from each vehicle, dressed in ordinary clothing and wearing sunglasses with no visible weapons. They proceeded together, swiftly and effectively. The individual holding the phone attempted to flee. He managed 6 feet before being restrained, with his arm twisted behind his back and his phone sliding across the pavement. The person with the clipboard made no attempt to resist. He simply sat down on the porch step, as if his confidence had been abruptly removed. One of the agents, a slender man with graying hair, addressed Rachel. Miss Carrington, are you all right? She affirmed her well-being. Minimal physical contact. No injuries were sustained. The camera recorded the entire incident. Excellent, he stated, then turned to Karina. Karina shrugged, acknowledging the notification. The timing felt correct. Within 10 minutes, the two individuals posing as law enforcement officers were secured, their identities confirmed, and they were positioned on the curb, resembling reprimanded children. Residents started observing from behind curtains. Several opened garage doors and lingered in the darkness, feigning sweeping activities. No one intervened. Even Douglas Varnell, the taller of the two men, now in handcuffs, finally spoke. We were just trying to make sure the neighborhood stayed safe. From what? Rachel inquired. He remained silent, but his eyes' movement towards the Douglas Varnell house indicated his intentions clearly. The other man's gaze directed at Douglas Varnell's house was observed. It wasn't missed by Rachel. It wasn't missed by the agents. It wasn't even missed by Karina, who now stood quietly beside the porch steps, arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the street as if observing a chessboard illuminate. An agent, a woman in her late 30s with a distinct New Jersey accent, overheard the interaction. She gave a single nod to her colleague and walked along the sidewalk towards Douglas's front door. He did not respond to the knock. Shortly after, the agent requested a second team. There were no sirens, only unmarked vehicles as previously. It was a display of clean, cold, silent efficiency. By this time, several more neighbors had emerged, remaining close to mailboxes and speaking quietly among themselves. None of them moved closer to the house. Rachel remained seated on her porch, still and observant, watching the events transpire. Karina stood beside her, a hand gently touching the porch rail. He never was that bright, Karina murmured. You know him? Rachel inquired. Not personally, but I've been observing his cameras for weeks. Rachel lifted an eyebrow. The ones he stated were for wildlife? Yes. It was peculiar how the wildlife seemed to resemble women walking their dogs or brown children on bicycles. The clipboard guy was escorted into one of the SUVs. The other individual, identified as Ronan Kessler, had a sealed juvenile record and resided just outside city limits. Both were hired laborers, not residents. However, their paychecks provided a lead. One of the agents returned to the porch, crouching to Rachel's eye level. We are currently reviewing surveillance footage. Your neighbor across the street has cameras. We are obtaining access through municipal override. The agent paused. Do you think he is connected? I believe whoever is orchestrating this considered you an easy target. Rachel gazed across the street. Douglas's front window blinds were now closed completely. You're going to find this surprising, the agent stated. Situations like this, they occur more frequently than one might assume. Fabricated HOAs, independent residents, private contractors, all operating discreetly. However, they selected the incorrect address this time. Karina quietly laughed. Absolutely. An hour elapsed, and the federal agents possessed sufficient evidence to knock on Douglas's door. This time he responded. Rachel didn't hear everything that was said, but she observed his expression when he understood this extended beyond a local matter. He was questioned about payments routed through a shell company, the number of anonymous police calls he had recorded from his residence, the fabricated notices, and the bogus HOA violations. He attempted to dismiss the inquiries. He supposedly stated, just doing my part to keep things orderly. However, order wasn't the core issue. The problem wasn't about porch decorations or SUVs. The difficulty arose because someone such as Rachel Carrington, given her measured actions and unwavering composure, undermined the sense of authority some residents valued in areas like this. They were unaccustomed to someone who didn't require their validation. Now, each of their methods had been recorded, the timing noted, and data compared. Returning to the porch, Karina moved nearer. Are you all right? I'm fine, Rachel replied. But I'm weary of this routine. Karina offered a slight smile. Perhaps a rewrite is in order. By evening, news had circulated. 2 arrests were made, a federal investigation commenced, and a request for voluntary interviews was sent to several homeowners on the block. Remarkably, no one questioned how Rachel had reacted so swiftly or why tactical agents had arrived in less than 10 minutes. They were unaware of the agency clearance, the debt of gratitude, or the discreet surveillance that had been ongoing for the past 5 weeks. Most importantly, they didn't realize who they were confronting as what seemed like a simple removal became a public event. Now, it was impossible to ignore what lay hidden just below the surface. By the next morning, the neighborhood felt shaken. It was evident in the closed garage doors, in the disrupted routines of morning walkers, and even the talkative couple on the corner remained silent. The normal pace was broken, and everyone understood the reason. Rachel was on her porch once more, holding coffee and with one leg crossed. There was no music, no book, only observation. She had experienced observation previously, in locations where a smile directed at the incorrect individual could result in detention. However, here in Roseville, the interactions followed a subtle understanding. Neighborhood expectations, community principles, safety anxieties, harassment disguised in a cardigan. Karina approached mid-morning, a file held beneath her arm. She remained silent until she was seated. They were digging deeper than I thought, she said. We caught 3 more devices near your yard, hidden in sprinkler heads. Rachel blinked. They planted audio? Worse, motion sensors, thermal reads. Somebody was building a case for something, or pretending to, from across the street. Another neighbor, an older woman named Leanne Price, peered through her curtains. This time, she didn't flinch when their eyes met. She was the one who called the cops on you. Twice, Rachel said quietly. Karina refrained from questioning how he possessed that information. Later that afternoon, a federal vehicle made a return visit, this time carrying official documents, subpoenas. The investigation had broadened. An examination of Douglas Varnell's finances uncovered a series of payments directed to private neighborhood enforcement agents working through a business named Civic Harmony Consultants, LLC. Their actions extended beyond simply fabricating HOA credentials. They were components of a loosely structured system designed to instill intimidation. This operation wasn't recent, nor was it particularly well concealed. The matter simply hadn't faced scrutiny before. Until now. Now, with a formal federal document involved, it was receiving serious consideration. A representative from the HOA board arrived later that day, appearing distressed. A quiet woman, Marisol Dupree, holding a notepad and offering apologies frequently. "We weren't aware, Miss Carrington," she said. "Douglas managed all enforcement concerns. We hadn't authorized any personal visits." "He informed me you had," Rachel said. Marisol averted her gaze. "I am truly sorry. Please don't apologize." Rachel emphasized the need for transparency, stating, "Let people know what happened." "We will." Before Marisol departed, she hesitated at the foot of the porch steps. "If it means anything, we're grateful you didn't retaliate, that you remained calm." Rachel responded, "I didn't remain calm. I remained prepared." News of the incident spread beyond the cul-de-sac. By the weekend, a local news van arrived. The reporter did not make contact, simply filming discreetly from a distance until federal agents requested they depart. The incident was already gaining traction online. A recording from a neighbor's Ring camera captured a portion of the confrontation, including the fake HOA badge, the shouting, and the takedown. When the clip appeared on social media, it ignited widespread anger. This wasn't solely due to what occurred with Rachel, but also because the situation resonated with many. Messages flooded in from across the country. One person shared, "This happened to my dad in Austin." Another recounted a similar experience in Phoenix, noting that the police sided with the HOA. The pattern of individuals wielding rules as a tool, it's a genuine problem. The streets of Roseville became a subject of discussion, not due to their well-maintained lawns or excellent school ratings, but because of what occurs when private power believes it can operate without accountability. Later that night, Karina brought over 2 glasses of wine. The sun had set. The porch light hummed gently above them. "You thinking about moving?" she asked. "No," Rachel said. "Not yet." Karina nodded. "Good, because it's different now. They know someone's observing from a distance, but the significant change wasn't among the neighbors." The realization dawned on Rachel. She understood how silence allowed them to operate and how a carefully chosen reply could effectively halt that activity. 2 days elapsed before a discreet meeting occurred at an unremarkable building close to the Sacramento Municipal Complex. There was no media coverage, no sensational announcements. Simply a table, 4 chairs, and 3 individuals who possessed a true understanding of how things functioned. Rachel was positioned at the far end, wearing all black and with a manila folder placed before her. Directly facing her was Agent Colin Braddock, the lead investigator for the now-active federal inquiry into Civic Harmony Consultants. A DHS cybersecurity representative sat to his left, their expression unreadable. Karina was positioned on Rachel's right, maintaining her usual composure. "What you're dealing with," Braddock began, "extends beyond this HOA, or even this neighborhood. The group you identified? They have been operating in clusters across several western states." Rachel acknowledged this with a nod. "They exploit delayed accountability, focusing on local homeowners associations, retirement communities, and gated suburbs." Braddock indicated a tablet. "They create a facade of authority, use regulations as weapons, and target individuals who don't conform, typically those with out-of-state license plates or who appear different, particularly if they move in without drawing attention." "They went beyond establishing a false authority," Karina stated. "They were collecting information." The DHS representative looked up. "Your residents had passive thermal tags. That is not homeowners association technology. It's surplus military-grade equipment." Braddock leaned forward. "Here's the part you're likely to find concerning." He indicated a flagged communication from 6 months ago. "One of our side channels detected it, but it wasn't initially prioritized." He slid the document across the table, a printout of an encrypted email chain with the subject line, New resident, confirmed background, CIA link. Rachel read it silently. Someone was investigating me before I even closed escrow. We believe so, Braddock stated. While they weren't entirely sure of your identity, their discomfort was evident, and the harassment began swiftly. It was a probing of limits. And if I had strongly opposed it, she mentioned they would portray me as the instigator. He confirmed this. It's a recognizable sequence. They instigate reactions, then amplify the pressure. They deliberately accumulate records to suggest instability. Karina added, they've underestimated this individual. Braddock offered a knowing smile. That's the consensus we've been receiving. This extended beyond individual grievances it always had. The situation Rachel encountered wasn't a simple dispute between neighbors. It was interwoven within a broader structure that relied on unspoken agreements. Following the meeting, as they headed to the car, Karina questioned the outcome. Do you believe this will hold now? With the charges and the exposure? Rachel responded, they'll suppress some of it, shielding the homeowners. Details will be concealed. But someone is observing now. It's no longer hidden. That evening, back at home, she retrieved a long untouched, dusty photo album from her bedroom closet. The album contained pictures from past projects, some with unclear faces, and others cut from international newspapers. Among them was a faded photograph of her mother standing in front of their house in Paterson, New Jersey, during the time a neighbor attempted to initiate eviction proceedings due to a zoning issue. She had resisted, steadfastly, and ultimately prevailed. That determination persisted. As dusk settled, Rachel stepped onto her porch once more. This time, she wasn't alone. Several neighbors, those who had previously avoided her, were walking dogs, watering plants, and acting as if they didn't notice her. A man across the street offered a small wave. She made no response. Not yet. She settled, crossed her arms, and gazed out at the cul-de-sac she now perceived distinctly. Not as a haven, but as a reflection. I used to think I could simply buy peace, she said aloud. Karina, having returned, responded while looking at her phone. You still can. It simply costs more than many anticipate. They remained in silence for a considerable time. Within the building, the cameras continued to record events. This wasn't due to an expectation of further incidents, but because detailed records were now essential for safety. Although the immediate danger seemed to have subsided, Rachel understood that the situation wasn't resolved. True success wasn't achieved through a single apprehension or a single exposure. It was about refusing to allow herself to diminish. A week later, the neighborhood had resumed its familiar routine. Lawn services were operating again, and children were riding their bikes. However, a palpable sense of caution lingered, particularly near the Carrington house. Some people offered waves, others deliberately avoided looking. A few seemed to desire an apology, but lacked the words to express it. Rachel didn't wait for them to decide what to do. Each morning, she worked from her home office. Her evenings were spent tending to the garden, which she had neglected since moving to Meadow Creek. She began walking around the neighborhood again, not out of obligation, but because she was able. Influence wasn't solely about defense. It was about existing openly without needing authorization. Karina arrived one evening, carrying a folded lawn chair and a chilled bottle of mineral water. I thought I'd keep you company, she said. They sat quietly for a while, observing the sky transform into a gentle orange hue. I've been thinking, Karina stated. Why do you think they were so bold? I mean, they didn't know who you were. But still, they didn't need to know. Rachel responded. They just assumed I wouldn't fight back. Karina nodded. Because most people don't. Because most people can't. They paused, letting the observation linger. It was an accurate assessment. Not everyone has a federal contact on speed dial. Not everyone has decades of tactical training. Not everyone has a Corina 2 doors down. And that's the point. The situation in Roseville extended beyond mere bias or intimidation. It involved a framework that facilitated individuals acting as gatekeepers, cloaking themselves in manufactured authority, fabricated concern, and deceptive neighborly gestures. They had established a functioning system. This system persisted until someone disrupted the established pattern. Afterward that evening, Rachel composed a letter at her desk. The letter was not addressed to the HOA, nor to her neighbors, but to a young woman she had yet to meet, someone who would eventually confront a similar circumstance. She wrote, "Don't wait for permission to have space. Claim it, subtly if possible, forcefully if necessary. Expect resistance. But remember, they consistently underestimate what they don't comprehend. Retain records, maintain composure, and most importantly, remain present, even when they desire your absence." She folded the paper, placed it within a journal, and slid it onto a shelf beside her badge. Not an award, not a recollection, a prompt, because this extended beyond a porch or a fence or a neighborhood rulebook. The narrative explored the lengths individuals would take to safeguard their perceived reality, and how swiftly that perception crumbled when someone asserted themselves and resisted conformity. The following Sunday, a community announcement circulated detailing a town hall meeting intended to rebuild faith and openness regarding neighborhood regulations. Douglas Varnell's name was discreetly eliminated from all HOA documentation. There was no formal justification provided. Rachel wasn't invited. However, she attended regardless. She positioned herself in the back row, remained silent, and simply listened, not to the spoken words. Regarding the atmosphere, however, the hesitant coughs, the measured language, the alteration in stance upon noticing her presence. Later, as she departed, Leanne Price approached her. "I wasn't aware the situation escalated to that degree," she remarked, adjusting her handbag strap. "We simply sensed something was amiss." "What was amiss?" Rachel inquired. Leanne paused. "I suppose I hadn't anticipated you would be so ready. I didn't anticipate needing to be." They remained there briefly. Then Leanne gave a short nod and walked off. This wasn't reconciliation, but it signaled the beginning of a reckoning. That night, Rachel posted a single sentence on her infrequently used social media account. "Politeness won't save you, but preparedness might." It quickly became widespread within days. People were no longer simply observing the drama. They were recognizing the underlying pattern, and perhaps, just perhaps, understanding it was time to disrupt it. So if you've reached this point, keep this in mind. Resilience isn't always about direct action. It can be found in a chair on a porch. It can be seen in a camera angled perfectly. It can be heard in a voice that remains strong. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe. Someone else out there needs to experience it as well. During a flight, a black pastor was asked to remove his cross. Rather than reacting with anger, he rose and shared a message that captivated everyone. It was a pleasant Friday morning in late April when Pastor Elijah Rowe entered Raleigh-Durham International Airport through the sliding glass doors, pulling a small black carry-on behind him. He wasn't hurried, never was. At 58 years old, Elijah possessed the composed demeanor of someone who understood that serenity wasn't achieved through haste. His flight to Albuquerque was planned with a connection in Kansas City, and Flight 287 would transport him through the initial segment. He was wearing a light cream linen shirt, dark slacks, and worn brown shoes that had been present at numerous potluck dinners and hospital rooms beyond measure. However, what distinguished him wasn't his attire. It was the small wooden cross resting softly against his chest. It wasn't ostentatious or large. No gold, no diamonds, simply a piece of carved wood, the edges softened by years of use. His grandmother had given it to him when he was 18, shortly before her passing. "Wear it when the world forgets who you are," she told him. He hadn't taken off since. At gate C21, Elijah located a quiet corner seat and retrieved a notepad. He didn't prepare his sermons on a laptop. He favored paper, appreciating the sound of pen against page. This week's message concerned forgiveness, once more. He quietly chuckled to himself. "It feels as though I'm meant to continue sharing what I'm still discovering," he murmured, taking a sip of lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. The boarding call came promptly. He rose, offered a pleasant good morning to the gate agent, and proceeded down the jet bridge. He gave a brief acknowledgement to the flight attendant stationed by the door. A tall woman with a formal demeanor and a precise tone. "Seat 22, Elijah spoke quietly to himself as he walked down the aisle. A young man was already settled in a 22B, wearing headphones and a hoodie. Elijah offered a polite smile and took a seat by the window. The boy didn't acknowledge him. That was acceptable. Elijah didn't require conversation to feel at ease. He positioned the cross against his shirt and continued writing in his notebook. After 15 minutes, the cabin door closed. The aircraft began to pull away from the gate. The standard announcements were made, followed by the familiar, somewhat jarring sound as the plane accelerated down the runway. Elijah murmured a brief prayer as the plane ascended into the sky. He was halfway through his outline on Luke 6 when a voice broke his concentration. "Sir," a woman's voice said from the aisle. "Sir, excuse me." Elijah looked up to see the same tall flight attendant from earlier, standing beside him. "Yes, ma'am?" he asked, his eyes gentle. She did not smile. "Could you please tuck your necklace into your shirt?" Elijah blinked. "My cross." She nodded. "We've received some complaints." He looked around, surprised. "From whom?" She replied quickly, "I can't disclose that. We simply request that passengers be considerate of items that may cause discomfort to others." He studied her face for a moment. There was no warmth in it, no opportunity for discussion. "I'm sorry," Elijah said slowly, "but this necklace isn't a display. It's my faith. It was my grandmother's." "Sir, I'm not attempting to argue with you," she said, her voice tightening. "I'm requesting that you please comply with a straightforward request so we can avoid any additional issues." "Is this an airline policy?" Her lips formed a thin line. "I need your cooperation," she stated. The young man in 22B adjusted his hoodie and looked at Elijah, then averted his gaze. Elijah kept his hands still on his notebook. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't moved. "I'm sorry," he repeated, his tone even quieter this time. "But I won't be hiding it." The flight attendant released a breath through her nose, appearing visibly annoyed. "I'll be back," she said, and then turned and left. Elijah leaned back in his seat and looked out the window. Below them, the clouds spread out, a vast expanse of brilliant white. He touched the cross carefully, his thumb tracing the worn rim. This feeling wasn't unfamiliar, not precisely. Yet it felt altered, as if something had changed, though he couldn't yet identify what. The flight continued, and so did their discussion. The drink cart was 2 rows behind when she returned, without a smile, without warmth. She maintained the same rigid posture and that precise, formal tone, making each word feel like a protocol rather than an exchange. "Sir," she repeated, standing before Elijah's row, her arms now crossed. "I must ask you once more to secure the necklace." A woman 2 rows above expressed that she finds it objectionable. Elijah didn't reply immediately. He observed her intently. Her name tag indicated C. Densmore. Her uniform was immaculate, with not a single thread amiss. She repeatedly looked at the other passengers, seemingly searching for support or an observer. He focused his gaze forward. In row 20, a woman wearing a blue blazer and large sunglasses remained fixedly ahead. She didn't look back, didn't move restlessly, simply waited. "I understand what you're saying," Elijah responded steadily. "But I am innocent. I haven't spoken to anyone. I'm simply sitting here quietly. Why is this necklace causing a problem?" Claire Densmore's jaw tightened. "This isn't concerning your silence. It's important to be thoughtful. If someone finds something you're wearing upsetting, it's fair to ask you to modify it," Elijah stated calmly. "If someone is offended by my faith, I don't believe that gives them the right to suppress it." At that point, her tone changed. A hint of her composure faded. "You're being uncooperative," she said, her voice rising. "I am asking you respectfully, but you are being confrontational," and several heads turned. A woman situated 2 rows back extended into the aisle, observing. A man seated across from Elijah shifted his position to gain a clearer view. Elijah's pulse quickened, though his expression remained unchanged. He glanced toward the young man in 22B. The kid had retrieved his phone, subtly, not overtly. Screen angled upwards, thumb poised above the record button. "I'm not trying to provoke anyone," Elijah said, speaking deliberately. "But I won't conceal my cross. I won't take it away to accommodate another person's ease I apologize. Claire expressed her disapproval. Then we may have to escalate this, she stated firmly. You're refusing to follow a directive from a flight crew member. That's a federal offense, someone exclaimed. Are you serious? Another voice inquired from a few rows back. A middle-aged man with a salt and pepper beard leaned into the aisle. He's literally just sitting there, he observed. Claire disregarded him. I'm going to inform the captain, she declared, maintaining eye contact with Elijah. We'll handle this when we land. Of course, Elijah responded. She turned and walked away again, this time with a quicker pace, speaking quietly to another flight attendant as she moved past the drink cart. The ensuing silence felt heavy. Elijah remained still in his seat, his pen still held between his fingers. The pages of his sermon notes shifted gently in the airflow from the overhead vent. Then a quiet voice emerged. Sir, the boy beside him whispered, almost lost in the plane's hum. I'm recording, just so you know, in case they attempt anything. Elijah slowly turned his head and offered the boy a thankful nod. Thank you, he said softly. I saw everything, the boy added. She's way out of line, Elijah smiled slightly. Sometimes it's not about the cross, it's about the person wearing it. The boy remained silent, but glanced down at his phone, which was still recording. 3 rows back, an older black woman whispered something to the person beside her. Her gaze met Elijah's for a brief moment. She offered him a subtle nod, as if acknowledging his presence and understanding his situation. That gesture carried weight. The intercom buzzed, and another attendant, not Claire, delivered a brief announcement regarding anticipated light turbulence. Standard procedure. However, the atmosphere on the plane had changed noticeably. Passengers were no longer solely focused on sleeping or entertainment. They were alert and observant. It wasn't the sort of attention Elijah desired, but his perspective had become secondary. Before the plane could land, an unexpected event occurred, one that even Elijah hadn't anticipated. By the time the plane stabilized after the turbulence warning, Claire Dinsmore returned to the aisle, but she was accompanied by another flight attendant. He was a younger man with dark hair and visibly nervous eyes. His name tag identified him as Jonas Worth, and unlike Claire, he lacked confidence in his demeanor. His steps were hesitant, appearing almost apologetic. Mr. Rowe, Claire began, ensuring her voice carried to a significant portion of the cabin. I've spoken with the captain. If you persist in disregarding crew instructions, we might need to take additional measures upon arrival. Elijah remained unperturbed. I would still appreciate knowing which policy I'm in violation of. You're becoming argumentative once more, Claire retorted. Jonas moved closer, observing the interaction. Perhaps we could simply... Claire interrupted him. Jonas, I'm managing this. And then it reappeared, that palpable tension, that familiar tone. Elijah stayed seated, outwardly calm, though his heart raced. Behind them, row 19 began to move. I don't see why he should be made to conceal his cross, a woman with curly red hair and a noticeable Wisconsin accent stated. I wear a Star of David necklace on every flight. I've never been addressed about it. Claire turned quickly. Ma'am, I am requesting you refrain from intervening. The woman responded, I'm not interfering. I'm simply observing that this feels like he's being unfairly targeted. At that moment, something changed noticeably. The atmosphere shifted. Passengers were no longer simply observing, but responding. A gentleman in seat 18D craned his neck. Is this truly how this airline handles situations? He inquired. I'm recording as well, and I understand how swiftly videos spread online. Claire appeared taken aback. She started to speak, then hesitated and closed her mouth. Elijah, Jonas said quietly, intervening and lowering his tone. Sir, I apologize truly. You've been entirely respectful. I believe we should reduce the tension. Let's allow this to pass. Claire's cheeks reddened. She looked at Jonas as if he had committed a betrayal. Then, with a visible effort to control herself, she hissed. He's disregarding a direct order. To do what? Elijah asked, maintaining his composure. To conceal a portion of myself that I've carried for 40 years? That doesn't seem correct to me, ma'am. Claire's jaw tightened again. I am finished. She turned and walked forcefully toward the front of the plane, her shoulders stiff with anger. Jonas remained behind, feeling unsure. "I apologize for all of this," he said softly to Elijah. "I believe she misinterpreted the circumstances," she responded. "I think she understood perfectly," Elijah said calmly. "She simply didn't approve of what she observed." Jonas lowered his gaze, then looked away. The cabin stabilized, but a feeling of unease lingered. Passengers murmured along the aisle, with some visibly shaking their heads. A cough broke the silence. The boy in 22B continued filming. Then Elijah took an unexpected action. He rose to his feet. Without raising his voice or gesturing, he stood in the confined area near his seat and angled himself so those in the surrounding rows could hear. "I don't often speak in public spaces such as this," he began, his voice steady but quiet. "But I believe it's important to say something." One by one, people turned to look at him. "I'm a pastor," he continued. "I serve a small church in Durham. This cross," he raised it carefully between his fingers, "was a gift from my grandmother. She experienced events that many of us only read about. She advised me to wear this when the world attempted to define me." A brief silence followed. "I have not removed it since her funeral. My reason isn't that I believe it improves me, but that it serves as a reminder to remain compassionate. Even when I am not shown kindness." A person in 24C covered their mouth. Another individual in 20F audibly sniffled. "I understand not everyone shares my beliefs. I acknowledge and respect that, but I am certain I have acted appropriately. I remained still, adhered to every guideline, and attempted to be courteous, even when I felt diminished." He addressed Jonas directly. "I do not require being asked to leave this flight. I pose no danger. I am merely a man traveling home to deliver a sermon on forgiveness on Sunday." The atmosphere on the plane was subdued, yet sometimes silence conveys more than words ever could, and the quietness wasn't going to last much longer. Claire had not reappeared since she departed. The whereabouts of Eleanor remained uncertain, whether she was in the galley, visibly upset, or once again speaking with the captain. It was unclear. However, the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. It wasn't just one person standing. Instead, a sense of reality had permeated the space, manifesting in every hushed exchange and fleeting look shared among those seated within 30 rows. Elijah quietly resumed his seat, as if finishing a chapter in a novel. He sought no accolades and craved no validation. He simply released a breath. The young man next to him ceased recording, though he kept his phone in hand. "You sure you're pastor?" he inquired softly, a slight smirk playing on his lips. Elijah laughed. "Some Sundays I question it myself," he admitted. The young man chuckled and glanced at his phone screen. "That's already being shared. People need to hear things like that." A few minutes elapsed. Following that, the woman in the blue blazer, the one Claire had mentioned complained about, gradually turned from 2 rows forward. Her sunglasses were now removed. She appeared to be in her mid-50s, with a tense expression, yet there was a gentleness about her. I remained silent. She spoke in a matter-of-fact tone. Elijah lifted his eyebrows. "Mom, I never said I was upset. I didn't mention your necklace." The atmosphere became quiet once more. Several passengers who had been listening seemed interested. "She simply inquired if I was all right," the woman added, and I replied that I hadn't observed anything. "Are you suggesting Claire wasn't truthful?" Someone murmured behind Elijah. The woman in the blazer remained silent. She pivoted, appearing somewhat less confident. Jonas emerged from the front of the plane. His shirt now had a slight wrinkle, as if he's been twisting his hands. He stopped near Elijah's row and bent down a little, speaking quietly. "The captain is aware," he said. "And just so you know, you're not in any trouble. We're not removing you. There's no written reprimand. Nothing." Elijah nodded. "Thank you for letting me know." Jonas expressed regret that things hadn't unfolded differently, noting that occasionally individuals carry emotional burdens that extend beyond physical luggage. Elijah offered a subtle smile in agreement, commenting that this phenomenon is evident in various settings, not just airplanes. Jonas paused, then continued, "I'm not sure if this is inappropriate, but would you be comfortable with me attending your church sometime? I used to go when I was younger, but it's been a long time. Elijah's smile widened. Certainly. Please do. I'll be sure to reserve a place for you. Jonas gently touched the armrest before departing. As he moved back up the aisle, a woman seated opposite Elijah bent forward. Pastor, she murmured, thank you. He observed her. She appeared older, possibly in her 70s. A long green scarf adorned her, and her hands rested in her lap, as if guarding something delicate. You didn't need to speak, she said, but you did. Sometimes silence can feel heavier than a voice, Elijah replied. She smiled, her eyes glistening. That is precisely it. The boy beside Elijah nudged him gently. Elijah gazed out the window. Let's just hope I'm preaching the same on Sunday as I'm living right now, he thought. A woman with curly hair, whom he's seen before, spoke from behind. I think the Lord already gave you your sermon. Pastor, she said, you just preached it at 35,000 feet. Laughter rippled through the cabin, soft, sincere, and welcome. Conversations started again, moving beyond quiet murmurs. A sense of energy and relief filled the cabin, as if it had expelled something it had been containing. However, Claire was still missing. But when she ultimately returned, she would not be alone, and she would not anticipate what awaited her. Approximately 40 minutes had passed since Claire's disappearance. It was believed she would remain missing until the landing. Yet, just as the seatbelt sign illuminated once more, she reappeared, accompanied by the captain himself. Captain Raymond Stills was in his mid-40s, gray hair buzzed close, weathered skin from years in cockpits. He didn't appear angry. He didn't appear rushed. But there was something in his face, an alert stillness, like someone who had seen far worse and didn't want to make a situation worse than it already was. He stopped beside Elijah's row and crouched slightly, just as Jonas had. Sir, he said in a low, calm voice, my name's Ray. I understand there's been some tension on board. Elijah met his gaze directly. Captain, I remained silent. This cross I'm wearing appeared to cause concern for a flight attendant. She requested that I conceal it. I declined. Ray observed the necklace, then noted Elijah's composed demeanor. I appreciate your manner, the captain said. It's more significant than you realize these days. Claire stood rigidly behind him, her arms crossed. Those seated around appeared to be ignoring the situation, yet no one was wearing headphones. All were attentively listening. I've spoken with my crew, Ray said, and I've reviewed the footage. Several passengers had documented portions of the interaction, including the young man seated nearby. Elijah briefly looked at the teenager, who offered a subtle nod, still clutching his phone as if it were a barrier. Ray rose and surveyed the adjacent rows. I want to be clear, he stated, his voice now more pronounced. This airline has no rule against religious symbols, be it a cross, a hijab, a yarmulke, or another item. Passengers may express their beliefs provided they do so respectfully. Based on observations, Pastor Rowe has been acting in that manner, prompting nods and applause from several people. Quiet, polite, and without drama, Ray addressed Claire. We're going to have a more in-depth conversation after we land. Claire offered no reply. Her expression remained unreadable, but her jaw was tense. She turned and walked back toward the galley without another word. Ray leaned toward Elijah. You're not in trouble. You never were. I apologize on behalf of the crew. You don't have to, Elijah replied, but I appreciate it. Ray offered a small smile. Well, some things are still worth saying. And with that, he returned to the cockpit. Jonas reappeared moments later and quietly offered Elijah a free drink and snack box. Captain's orders, he said sheepishly. You deserve at least that, Elijah chuckled. I'll take the almonds. As the plane began its descent into Kansas City, a different feeling settled over the cabin. People were chatting again, not nervously but openly. Two men who hadn't spoken the whole flight were now exchanging church stories. A young woman pulled out her Bible and started highlighting verses. A toddler across the aisle waved at Elijah, and his mother mouthed, "Thank you." Elijah simply sat back and completed his sermon notes. He wrote, "Forgiveness, but not silence." The older woman in green across the aisle retrieved a pen and wrote something on a napkin, then passed it to Elijah. He unfolded it and read, "You reminded us how to carry grace." "Thank you." He folded the napkin and placed it into his notebook. The plane began its final descent, but there was a quiet sense of closure. It felt as though something had broken and then repaired itself, if only a little. Unbeknownst to Elijah, the event wasn't concluded. The world beyond that plane had already taken notice. Flight 287 landed in Kansas City just after 4:20 p.m. The tires made a soft thumping sound as they touched the runway. The standard chime occurred. Passengers unfastened their seatbelts. The overhead compartments released with a click. Yet, a peculiar stillness permeated the movement, as if no one wished to be the first to disrupt the significance of what had transpired in the air. As the plane taxied toward the gate, a flight attendant, someone other than Claire, announced over the intercom. Her voice sounded nervous, almost shaky. She expressed gratitude for everyone flying with them that day. For those continuing their journey to Albuquerque, boarding would resume shortly after a brief pause. Elijah waited patiently. He consistently prioritized allowing others to disembark first. He remained seated with his hands resting on his notebook, his cross still noticeable as the aisle emptied. When he eventually stood to collect his bag, Jonas greeted him at the plane's front. "Sir," he stated, "there are 2 airport officers just outside the jet bridge. They're not here for you. They simply want to speak briefly with the crew and take a statement." Elijah raised an eyebrow. Was someone pressing charges? "No," they replied, but once the footage started spreading, someone tagged airport security, then a few others. "I suppose people are watching." Elijah stepped off the plane and into the fluorescent-lit walkway. 2 officers stood to the side, but neither approached him. They spoke softly with a woman holding a clipboard, presumably a gate supervisor. Jonas acknowledged him with a nod and returned to the aircraft. Inside the terminal, Elijah located a quiet seat near the window. He retrieved his phone for the first time in hours, revealing 30 new messages, missed calls, and a voicemail from his assistant at the church. However, a notification at the top of the screen caught his attention. A video had gone viral. It was the recording from the teen in seat 22B, now shared on TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. The caption stated, "Flight attendant attempts to embarrass pastor for wearing a cross." See his response. It had over 800,000 views and was increasing. Elijah watched only a few seconds. The video showed him seated calmly, Claire standing over him. Her voice was sharp, his reply quiet and steady. Then it shifted to his impromptu speech, the cross visible between his fingers. He turned the phone face down. He disliked attention, always had. He wasn't a person seeking headlines or clicks. A deeper feeling resonated within him. It wasn't pride, nor was it fear. It was the weight of being observed. A few minutes passed, and the teenager from 22B approached him. "Hey," the boy said, slightly winded. "I'm getting off here. My layover is in KC. I just wanted to say thanks again for not reacting negatively." Elijah smiled. "You accomplished more than I did." "You spoke the truth," the kid laughed. "No, man, you experienced it. I simply captured it on video." He extended his hand. "I'm Tyrell, by the way." "Elijah," they responded, shaking hands. The boy departed, his phone still in his hand, now with a more upright posture. Elijah reclined and rubbed his eyes. The day's burden began to weigh heavily on him. Immediately, his phone vibrated, displaying a message from his assistant. The church board viewed the video. They requested he address the matter on Sunday. Discussions about it were widespread. He rested his head against the terminal window. Outside, a plane was ascending. The engines created a powerful roar. The sun had descended just enough to illuminate the wings in gold. This was not what he had envisioned. He had come seeking tranquility and found himself amidst turmoil. Yet, perhaps storms were not always intended to be averted. For sometimes, the most profound teachings begin well before the formal setting and resonate far beyond the conclusion of a journey. Sunday morning arrived sooner than Elijah anticipated. He stood behind the pulpit at Grace Fellowship in Durham, the same location where he'd delivered sermons almost every week for the preceding 18 years. However, this time, the atmosphere felt altered. The seating was more densely filled. Unfamiliar faces occupied the pews, some from different churches, and others seemingly from nowhere. Phones were already capturing video before he began speaking. He chose not to start with scripture this time. He advanced, set his notes to the side, and surveyed the audience. Most of you viewed the video. He started. Some of you shared it, while others placed calls. Some expressed anger. Some inquired why I didn't shout, why I didn't call her out, why I didn't fight back. He paused, allowing the atmosphere to become still. I've considered that as well. I've been reflecting on it consistently since. There were no microphone issues, no sounds of discomfort, just a quiet stillness. I remained composed on that plane, not from a place of fragility or fear, but because I've experienced enough to understand that the most prominent voice isn't always the most powerful. Occasionally, fortitude lies in remaining still when every instinct urges action. Occasionally, it's about declining with composure rather than anger, heads affirmed throughout the sanctuary. I didn't display that cross to instigate anyone. I wore it because it serves as a reminder of my identity. And when someone asks you to conceal the very essence that formed you, you are presented with two options. Suppress your being to ease others, or remain steadfast and allow the resulting unease to reside with another. He glanced across the first row. Terrell was present beside Elijah's assistant. He offered a slight smile. The incident on that flight affected everyone. It highlighted how frequently we are instructed to be less assertive, quieter, and more accommodating. However, the reality is that one's beliefs, personal narrative, and cultural background are not liabilities. They are not something to be regretted, nor are they expendable. He touched the small wooden cross he wore and lifted it with care. My grandmother gifted me this not for its appearance, but for its enduring significance. She told me, "They'll try to take your voice. Don't hand them your silence, too." A low murmur ran through the crowd. Grief, pride, recognition. He took a deep breath. I don't hate the woman from a plane. I'm not angry, but I hope she saw something that day that challenged her. And I hope we all remember, just because the world can't carry your truth doesn't mean you need to hide it. He stepped back. The congregation stood without prompting. It wasn't applause. It wasn't noise. A palpable sense of unity arose, as if a profound understanding transcended mere words. Following the service, Elijah emerged into the fresh spring air. Individuals approached him, extending handshakes, embraces, and cards. Some were visibly moved to tears. One woman gently placed her hand on his shoulder and quietly said, "You gave me permission to stop hiding." By that evening, the video had garnered 3.2 million views. Media organizations began contacting him, requesting interviews and soliciting editorials. But Elijah remained focused on his local community. His inbox remained full, yet his hand continued its work, visiting a family in the hospital, organizing food for the shelter, and completing the next week's sermon. The cross never left his neck. And for each story that arrived concerning someone standing up, speaking out, or simply choosing not to shrink, he'd whisper a quiet prayer. Not for praise, but for courage. The kind that doesn't roar. Just the kind that remains. Because real change doesn't always begin with a protest or a headline. It begins with one person choosing to remain present. And if this story resonated with you, please don't simply move on, but share it, discuss it. And always remember to remain true to yourself, even when it's simpler to conform.